During this session, what we like to do is, based upon the first two sermons that we heard, really, is actually do kind of a panel discussion, Q&A, and really try to make this very practical for maybe things that we're going through in ministry or things we want to kind of work out that we heard throughout the time as our brothers were serving us with the Word. And so this is really a time to interact and learn from one another. And so I'll go ahead and open up to you guys first. I have some questions that I can ask for us to get us going, but let me open up to you guys first, and if there's anything that kind of struck you during the sermons that you want to hear a little bit more about or hear their thoughts on, or maybe something that you're dealing with in your local setting that you want to have these guys weigh in on, okay? So go ahead and fire away.
This is not from any of the messages, but just from a conversation I was just having with Garrett about a rotation of elders and deacons in terms of pros, cons, why you should, why you shouldn't. I would like to hear that from y'all in terms of just all that.
Let me recap it real quick. So question on rotations of elders and is what's the positive about having rotations, with negatives of that? Have they done it? Time frames, things of that nature. Great. Go ahead, guys.
Some churches, there's not a law in Scripture on this. Some churches do not have term limits on officers who are elected. Some do. We elected to have term limits to want to give guys a way to in a dignified way step off and get rest, who are not in the pay of the church. Also, you could get into a situation where, I was telling Daniel, where you realize someone's dynamic on a board is they continue to play the role of a contrarian. They're not really in step with the pastoral philosophy of the board. They kind of want to come in and lead, be a single leader themselves, or they see it sometimes. You may have someone who comes in and wants to, they think it's their job to keep the pastor humble and cause him pain. These stories are true. And I was, telling Daniel, so your group should be looking at you. Okay, we've set him aside for this task. We understand he's been uniquely equipped by the Lord. We want to aim him well. We want to aim. You want your preaching pastors or whoever you've set it aside in that ox work to be aimed well. You don't want to waste their time. The church is paying them to do a job, and so you want a board who understands how to cultivate and work that. And so, I was just commending him. There's a number of good, prudent reasons, not law, but prudent reasons to have term limits. Our church, our guys are up for a 1-year term. That's short for some people. I understand why others would disagree with me on that, but that's just been our small church, and it's been good for us. Some people do 3, some people do other things, but that's what we do.
Real quick follow-up on that for you. So they do a 1-year term, and then they have to come off, or they just get to decide, the congregation? What happens then?
Oh, the 1 year is, no, they don't have, they're not forced off.
Okay.
It allows the board to say, hey, do you want to come back and serve again? Or we can say, we as a board don't see this, we're not working together well as a team. We have had to ask a brother to take that 1-year election, and that would be the end. He would come into the elders meeting already defeated, I got to be here and do this 3-hour meeting. Well, that's what we signed up to do. We're going to spend an hour or more just in prayer over every member of the church, their spouse, their children. We're going to labor together in prayer. Then we're going to spend time on shepherding issues. Then we've got to take care of anything else. It can run hours. That's a sacrifice to be an elder. So he was just not doing well. And so me and another elder and I just went to him and talked to him about that, and we just realized, brother, we would encourage you. You seem like you need rest, and just lovingly help him. You may like the leadership role, you may like the attention, but you're not really up for the work. And that 1 year gave him a dignified way to rotate off. Is that what you're looking for? Something?
Yeah. That, and just as how the congregation, do you let the congregation know that? What you just say? We together have decided, he has decided, just the congregation's role in that, or what's communicated to them.
Yeah, whenever someone rotates off, we've had them come up in front of the church and thank them for their service, and we pray for them. And we don't make a we don't bring him into every detail, like any elder board would do. You have to guard and protect those particular details.
Perfect.
Yeah, probably the biggest challenge would be if you're in a church and you have your first elder and you look around and you go, is there anyone else in the wings? That would be my only concern with rotation. You want to make sure you've got some guys there that you can rotate. But I think with that, you can put it into your policy that once you reach a certain level, you're going to start a rotation, and then do what's suitable. 1 year is pretty tight. I mean that's really tight. Generally, I hear 3-year terms. That's most of the time. Yeah.
Yeah, we have, that's the great thing about a constitution is you can amend it. At this stage of our life, that's been the best for us right now. We may have to change that eventually.
And the way you put it, at this stage in our lives, in our ministry, you need to make some adaptations with where you are, because you can, say, Brad, show me your polity. I'm going to do exactly what you're doing. You're not pastoring in Columbus, Georgia. Yeah. So you're pastoring where you are. Make the adaptations. If Scripture gives clear guidelines, you follow those. Where the Scripture is silent on it, and you're having to function, just like you said, there's nothing about rotation. I think we do that as a matter of helping to keep the board fresh. If there were some issues, it gives us a very gracious way of rotating some guys out. It also ups the ante for guys in the congregation to think, I want to be part of the elder team. How can I prepare for that? And so you can raise the bar on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add other than I would just, you mentioned your constitution. That's interesting. We haven't added it. We do the same thing, just 3-year terms rather than 1-year terms. We haven't articulated it in the Constitution in writing, which has given us a little liberty to make the policy work for us rather than us work for the policy. Because there have been a few times when it was time for a brother to rotate off according to our informal policy, but for a variety of reasons, we just wanted that guy in the room for another season, and he was willing, and so we weren't forced by something that was sort of mandating an action on our part. So that's just one possibility.
Yeah, and we don't have, there are some constitutions where it's, you serve for 3 years, you can sign up for another 3, but after 6, you absolutely have to have a year off. We don't have that hardwired in ours where somebody absolutely has to come off. That's where we are in our history of our church, is this 1-year situation gives a guy some time to serve. And we had 2 wonderful, long-standing elders both come off at the same time. They were tired. They needed 2 years rest, and in God's providence and grace, He provided more elders for us to take their place, and it made them step up in new ways. And so, but you have to figure that what's best, like you said, for your church.
Any follow-up question out there, guys, with that you would like to ask on that? Open question and answer.
¿Cómo empezar a trabajar con hombres para formar un equipo pastoral de cero, pero desde la iglesia local? Si nos pudieran hablar un poquito de eso.
How does forming a pastoral group from the beginning works, but from within the church?
Okay. You do a lot of praying, and you do a lot of modeling of what does it look like to be an elder. Because if you know, if we come across, and this picks up on some of what you were saying earlier, Brad, if we come across like all the time, we're just tired and worn out, and we're complaining, why would anybody want to join us and do that? They need to see, yeah, there's burdens, yes, there's strains, yes, there are difficulties, but the joy of being able to serve is really incredible. So we do a lot of praying. I wish I had prayed more. I mean, honestly, I wish I had prayed more as foundation on that. We do a lot of modeling. We do a lot of teaching, and we act intentionally. And that fourth thing, we act intentionally to try to raise guys up. So by that, I started years and years ago. We called it a pastoral internship, and it was really just intense discipleship for guys that had the potential of being leaders in the church. Some of those guys might become elders. Some of them might eventually become pastors or missionaries. And I just did it open-ended. We didn't have okay, we're going to do this for a year and then you're off. If you're in it, you're in it. You could die and get out of it, but no, there are some guys that stepped aside because it just didn't fit them well. But that was the pool that I worked from on raising up elders. And so I had guys, I would say, hey, we're, you know, I got a group of guys I'm teaching. Why don't you join us? You know, we're meeting on Sunday afternoon or, you know, whenever. Why don't you join us? See what you think about it. And then I'm watching those guys and I'm cultivating them. So you're not looking at how can I get this done in a year. You're looking at how can I lay the groundwork for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years by training guys. And I would say be very intentional in pursuing men. And so if you see someone that's got really godly character and they're showing some teaching ability, and Juan Sanchez's, what's his little book called on leader? The Leadership Formula. Yeah. In his, he said he's not looking for guys that are already great teachers. He's looking at guys that are showing good potential on it. So it may not be somebody that's super polished, but you see the potential in them. You work with them, teach them, train them, have them read material, discuss stuff, have them write book reports and discuss them. Think about the whole broad range of what you do in pastoral ministry and teach it to them. And I did that for years and years, and a number of those guys ended up becoming elders in the church. So that's the pool that you're working from. Just realize it's a long process, and you may see some quicker short-term fruit out of that, but think about it for long-term fruit. That's what you want to aim for. So pray, model, teach on it, you know, in your expositions of the word, teach on it, and then be intentional when you're pursuing guys and you're training them.
The only thing I would say is it's better to go a little bit too slow in appointing somebody than to go too fast and appoint the wrong people. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Any other follow-up, Talon, on that you want to say?
Yeah, thank you. That's great, right? On the 4 points you have given about prayer, modeling, teaching, and intentionality. So I'm going to be a church planter next year, by the grace of God. But what are resources out there that I can tap into and say, oh, okay, these are great books to go through with these men? Because there's a lot out there to choose from. And I just don't want to waste time in a sense of going through 100 books or I'm only going to choose 10 or 15 or anything like that.
There are so many good things to recommend. Like, how much is available now versus 30 years ago, right? It's not even.
There was nothing available.
Yeah. So for me, I'm at the point now where if I see a young guy showing a lot of potential, he's diving deep into stuff on his own. That's kind of shocking in the sense of, you're really reading that first thing. It kind of he's young in the faith. And so I deliberately give him blocking and tackling Christianity materials. And I want to see if it still warms their heart. So things that focus on the gospel, things that focus on what it means to understand sin and what it means to understand humility before the Lord. So I'll give them some old classic basic stuff. And I want to see if they're just like, oh, like that, that means I got some good work to do with them. So sometimes, that's just something that I look for. I want to see how they receive the basic stuff first. If they're still warmed by those blocking and tackling truths. If they're not, I'm concerned. And then once they get that, I'll start giving them some more meat.
He probably, I don't know if he'll say it himself, but this one of the ones that we're giving out here, Pastor Phil there wrote this one on, and you should have it. If you don't, there's extra copies over there. Grab this one. This was a newer work that he just did on really this idea of looking at deacons versus elders. How do you go about it? Who are you looking for? This type of stuff. So that's part of why we're giving this one out. As the other one, Elders in the Life of the Church, that you did, which is exceptional as well. Others that you would recommend as well that you've found helpful?
Well, yeah, Nine Marks has a number of books, there, and a lot of articles. The Pillar Network has a number of articles on our resource section on the website. As far as developing it, I really go into detail in the Mentoring Church. We have the Spanish version, that should be in the package for our Spanish-speaking brothers. That one is more from the ground floor. How do I develop a training ministry that would help raise those guys up? And this last one, Mending the Nets, is it's kind of a simplified version of to me, a more practical, straightforward version of the book on elders in the life of the church, and the Mentoring Church, and Shepherding the Pastor that I did with Rich Shadden. He kind of puts all those things together, and it's right now is being worked on to be translated in Spanish.
Yeah.
So
That'd be good.
yeah.
Yeah. Brad, yeah, good question. Yeah. You have a question? So the question, and I'm going to change it just a tiny bit here on that, but that's a good thing. Guys, you mentioned character. You're looking for guys with character, a little bit of teaching. Is there anything else that's going into when you're looking at guys, lay elders, other, even let's say you're shopping around, perhaps, you're going to go outside the church to bring somebody in to come on staff. What does it take to be a pastor? Kind of thinking through 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1. What are some things there that you would highlight? And really, maybe there's a lot you could say there, but what would you really kind of put your finger on from your years of observations on that?
You want to go first? I would look, that's a wonderful question, excellent question. I like that. Certainly, you're looking at that broad picture of character in 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1. I think if you look at those are just another way of saying, what does it look like when the fruit of the Spirit is working deeply in your life and pouring out of you? So I'm looking, do I see the fruit of the Spirit in a guy's life? Do I see humility? Do I see teachability? And if I see those things, and the guy has a real hunger for the Word, he's reading, he likes to read good books, he can articulate the Word. If I see that, then I feel like that's something to work with, and And you can see the Lord use that. And so I've had guys that I've worked with that are really good brothers, but they probably don't need a pastor. But they're good, faithful brothers, and they can serve the church well, but they don't need a pastor. You've got to have a love for the congregation in a very intense way. It's kind of like love for the congregation on steroids. It just is hyped up. You're sensitive to the members of the congregation. I remember years ago talking with a guy that was wanting to pastor, and I was thinking, I think what you're telling me, I want to have a regular place where I preach every week. There's a difference between having a pulpit where you preach every week and a pulpit where you're preaching, but you're also shepherding a congregation. And so do you see a shepherding heart in those guys?
Yeah, that's excellent. I would say to your question, you have to aspire. I think a man needs to aspire to this, and the church needs to agree with that.
Come on, give us more. Flesh that out, because there's sometimes, I don't know if you guys have had that. You talking to a guy, you see a guy, and he's like, I'm not really sure I want to do that, or I'm not sure, or they feel bad.
Yeah,
Like, oh,
yep,
should I want this? Oh, but then I'm like, I'm hungry for leadership. Is that how I come
I
across?
think,
Help us with Aspire.
I think, yes, that's a great question, because with one lay elder at our church, I think, had been presented with a form of humility, an expression of humility to him, as it was very difficult for him to see himself in that role, even though he was already doing that role without the title. And to some of the other brothers, it was a bit of a put off. They were like, well, he doesn't really want this, but yet he's already doing it. And I think he just needed a new paradigm through which to see humility, rather than, no, I'm not good enough for this, but the paradigm that, brother, you are exactly what we want in an elder, pastor. Now humble yourself by letting the Lord use you in this particular way. But I think the discerning, correct aspiration in especially young men is very, very important, and something that we need to think deeply about and really test and call out of some men, but also check in others. So it takes a lot of discernment to know, to vet out, to pull out, to purify that aspiration in a person.
Either one of you two want to say anything about with that?
Some guys you have to put the brakes on because they do not have the maturity, the self-awareness. They like the public aspect of ministry. There's parts of their life that have great maturity, but often you'll find very pronounced immaturity. And then there's the guy who's already doing it. Sometimes we don't see ourselves, right? Most of the time we don't. That guy actually was aspiring to pastor. He wasn't, he was timid about the notoriety, the public formality of it, seems like. And there are guys like that. Those are wonderful. Those are the guys you really long to see the congregation acknowledge and recognize as elders. So with a younger guy, I definitely don't want to throw water on him. I just want to speak frankly to him. Hey, you think about girls so much. We need to let's work on self-control. You know, like I know you're young, you're single. You're saying now I'm 20 years old and I want to be a pastor. That's fine. I'm not going to kill that. But all I know to do is just take you to the Word and keep. You know, if you can hear this from me, that's a good sign. We've got time to work. Those are the two different guys. Yeah.
Can a guy stop aspiring? Can they aspire to be an elder and then life changes, they've done it for a while, something happens, and then they stop aspiring? Did you have that? Have you guys experienced that, interacted with that with guys?
To answer your question, I would say yes, they can go through a period where they don't want to do that anymore. They need to, for a number of reasons, step away. I have seen that happen. Heck, none of us are guaranteed to be in the pulpit as long as, Phil was there or John MacArthur's still there somehow. It's sort of, there could be a time where there's been times I think probably many of you in this room have thought maybe would it be better for my wife and I to step away and do something completely different. There's been moments, there's been Monday mornings, that's been very real.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think we can sometimes make an idol out of pastoral ministry. And so I don't think that for a variety of reasons, I wouldn't want anybody to walk away feeling like it's a shameful thing to, for a variety of reasons, that would be a kind of yoke that you're not meant to bear. So, and I'm not saying that to give people any, it's not, you don't come in and come out of it like, yeah, I think I'll do this for this next couple of years, but the Lord has different seasons in the lives of his saints.
I had a professor in college that said that sometimes guys think that God's calling them to preach, but instead he's calling them to plow. And one of my good friends, wonderful brother, was, had that aspiration. And so he ended up pastoring, and he said he finally realized that it was something, it was an infatuation that he had. And so he stepped down, faithfully served the church, wonderful brother, ministering in a church, but not serving as a vocational pastor. I think there are shifts that go on too. I say this, I'm saying this very experientially, because I sensed that aspiration, that call. I use the word call more so. I sensed that when I was 16, and then started pastoring when I was 23, 24, I don't know, something like that, and then retired from vocational pastoring. But I still had that heart to pastor. So I'm still pastoring, and the church where my wife and I are members now are going to be voting on me in a week and a half to be a lay elder in the church. Well, I'm still pastoring, and so it's in your heart, it's in your mind, it's in your blood. You just may function differently than what you're doing right now, what these two guys are doing. Because see, I'm not pastoring a church now. I did for 44 years, but I'm still pastoring people regularly. That's part of the life. So having said that, I do think there are times that guys, maybe they've just spent everything they have, and it's probably better for them to step down. Not step away from walking with the Lord. Be faithful, walk with the Lord. But it may be time for them to step down.
Yeah. You said the shepherding part there, so I do want to press in, and then we'll see if you have more questions out there. Can a guy, so we're using the term, I hear pastor, I hear elder. We would say here, pastor, elder, bishop, all three describing the same office. When you're talking about, in your sermon on, we had Acts, we're talking about we're going to shepherd the flock. Does every elder, pastor, do they have to shepherd, and do they need to have a heart to shepherd the whole flock? What if I've got a guy, he's really good with people at his own age. He seems to care and shepherd them, doesn't really even know the names maybe of other folks in the church, or he doesn't get with everybody, but he seems to shepherd pretty well around his own age group. Is that a guy that you're thinking could be there and we got to work with him, or is that he just likes people his own age? Have you ever had anything with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think we all understand that might exist in a younger man, and that doesn't necessarily disqualify him from future eldership or even present eldership, but maybe it needs to be further developed. That muscle needs to be expanded, because the question you started out with, I think, must be answered in the affirmative, that yes, a pastor, a shepherd, has to be a shepherd of the whole flock. I think that doesn't mean that every elder is going to be strong in every demographic or every type of elder, every type of shepherding situation, but I would say that it's very important that all of the under-shepherds on an elder team have the whole church on their heart. Otherwise, I think you can just break down in factions and silos, and then ministries start to get pitted against each other, and demographics. Then that elder almost becomes like then the elder team becomes almost like Congress. It's like a representative from a particular district. And that's like American politics. It's not the church's organizational structure. So if a young man might have a little bit, if he has a propensity or a leaning, I'm fine with sort of cultivating that, but I also want to say, brother, like, man, learn to love the older people or the folks not like you. And that may not be your sweet spot, but it's not a spot that you can ignore as an elder. You need to develop that auxiliary muscle in your eldering.
I think of 1 Corinthians 12. Those parts of the body that are weaker are indispensable, and those parts of the body that we consider less honorable, we clothe these with greater honor, and our unrespectable parts are treated with greater respect, which our respectable parts do not need. Just in that illustration of thinking about parts of the body that you're uniquely sensitive to. And so if he lacks that depth and concern for that part, those other parts of the body that do not fit his demographic of preference, I'd be concerned, and I would talk to him about that, yeah.
Guys out there, yeah. Tom. Well, you can say it and I can repeat it if you want.
What about, I've been in, around the block quite a few times, being on the mission field and then in different churches. And what about sabbatical? I know a missionary goes out for maybe deputation, but also for a rest. What is your read on that?
Again, I would not impose a law upon a church to, you must do this. I would definitely counsel them from Scripture. You can make a case for sabbatical rest. And if you're thinking about the longevity of a pastor, missionary, giving them prolonged rest from the pulpit and from certain duties would be a kindness to their perseverance and their family's encouragement to keep staying there, to keep taking the blows from the assaults of the evil one, which, as we've heard already today, it come regularly to pastors' homes. So yeah, I would just say, yeah, steward the pastors well. Think about their big picture, not just the immediate. Children think in the terms of what's immediately important to them. But maturity shows us we're thinking, okay, where's he going to be if he keeps this pace up in a few years? And it could cost us if we don't invest in getting that man out of the pulpit some. It could cost us to not do this. And so I would commend it from a standpoint of love and wisdom and discernment of stewarding the gifts the Spirit raises up in the church.
I shudder to use this illustration with you sitting here being a former Army Ranger. However, I love to read World War II material, and one of the things that I've noticed that some of the mistakes that were made in World War II, and some of it just because they didn't have anybody else to put in, there were guys on the front in the middle of battle for such a long period of time that they got so weak, a lot of them got killed because they had gotten numb and weren't functioning as they should. Well, we could take that same principle and say, okay, how about in the work of the local church? If we put it into the rhythm of a congregation, that those who are serving as pastor, elders, overseers in the church, that, after a certain period of time, they'll be given a respite so they can catch their breath, be retooled, be refreshed. I think it's very wise to do that. You might do that differently with lay elders as opposed to your staff elders. But it took me about 25 years to finally get my guys to go, oh, yeah, we need to really do this and do this seriously. But that was helpful for the guys that followed me, and I try to encourage churches to do this. One of the things that I've talked with lay elders about is you have a responsibility to keep an eye on your staff pastors and to be aware of what they're walking through, the rhythm of their life, reading their facial expressions, sensing in their voice. And if you see I think this brother is really wound too tightly here. He's got to have a breather. Then the lay elders have a responsibility to step up and say, brother, we're going to give you a sabbatical, and that's a wonderful gift. So some of this is the pastor having self-awareness. Like I was on a call with some guys, and one of the pastors said, I just got to tell y'all, I'm really tired. And he's been going through a lot. And so I followed up with him on it, and he's got some space. His elders are aware, they're watching it. So that's good. You don't want to get in a situation where a guy gets burned out on ministry. And I've certainly seen that. And I don't shake my finger at those guys. They're mentally, emotionally, spiritually exhausted. And part of that's responsibility of the church not caring for them and not paying attention. And I think it's because a lot of times people sitting in the pews just think, well, yeah, they visit us when they're in the hospital and they get up and talk for 35, 40, 45 minutes. What's the big deal for that? They don't understand that whole process and why Paul talked about all those things that he had gone through, being shipwrecked and beaten, and he said, beyond all that, I bear on me daily the burden of the church. And so we just need to be sensitive of that.
Good question.
That's a good question.
It's a follow-up to the sabbatical question. Best use of the time. How should a pastor, having been given a sabbatical, use that time to refresh himself?
I've had a few sabbaticals, one that was more proactive and one that was reactive, and so I think it might depend on the circumstances of that. For the reactive one, where I was just exhausted, I think it was helpful for me to not have anything to do. In our lane of our stream theologically, we can almost feel this pressure, like, you got to report to the church, I'm taking a sabbatical, and this is what I hope to accomplish, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, well, geez, you're not resting, you're actually going to work just by, on your own. So I think that's my contribution to this answer, would just be that I think there's going to be different categories of sabbaticals. And some might just be pure rest, and that's all there is to it. And some might be for some particular preparation or study or seminary course or something like that, or whatever.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I think it's going to vary from pastor to pastor. So what I would do, I would ask him, what do you need right now in your life to help you with your ministry equilibrium, so you're balanced more? What do you need for that? What do you need for things that have been burning on your mind that you've been delaying? What do you need in terms of your devotional disciplines? What do you need are you slacking in that, and you need to just stop so that you form much stronger habits in that? I'd put it like this. I have a certain part of my brain. I'm not speaking of this neurologically. I'm doing it metaphorically. I have a certain part of my brain that is my pastor brain, my pastor lobe, and I function and my mind is whirling. I've got another part of my brain that's doing other things, and it may be work. Like for me, it's writing, and so I've got that part of my brain that's writing, and I can work hard at that, but it doesn't wear me out the way pastoring does. So it all depends on the guy. One of our pastors took a sabbatical. He's doing a PhD at Southern, and he spent probably a third of it, maybe even a little bit more than that, just chilling, spending time with his family. Then the rest of it, he worked on dissertation. And I would check with him, okay, tell me how the dissertation's going. I didn't ask him how much about the rest of us going. I should have. But he was working on that. So I'm like Brad. I think you have those times where you just need to shut down. And like my friend that said he's really tired, I'd say, then brother, don't go write anything. Just have good long devotional times. Spend time with your wife and kids. Maybe read a couple of good books, and that's it. If somebody's in a different position, then maybe there's some work they want to do. Now, I don't think they need to go and do much preaching, because that's going to defeat the purpose of it. But I've known, like Jose, when he was on sabbatical, visited a number of churches and just asked questions. He spent a couple of days with, he and Nira spent a couple of days with Karen and me, and we talked about life and ministry. And it was so refreshing being with them, and hopefully we were able to answer some questions. And so I think you map out what you need. And again, I believe on our Pillar website, we've got some one or two articles on that.
Guys, other questions related to this or things from the talks earlier? Yeah. I can't do it, sorry.
Come on, Billy.
Not that language.
¿Tú me entiendes eso? ¿Te puedo decir? Un grupo, sí, tenemos un grupo, quizás 4, que se le ha hecho a la congregación, que se la va a presentar en una fecha, pero en la capacitación nos damos cuenta que hay algunos que no está bien, que quizás hay una brecha de carácter. Lo manejamos solo con la persona, le decimos a la persona, mira, creo que no están listos, pues la congregación puede que pregunte, o le decimos a la congregación,
let's say if you had a situation where you had a man or a group of men with whom you were working to prepare them for eldership or for leadership, and then through that process, you figure out that maybe this man or these 2 or 3 men, let's say, aren't ready yet. How do you then handle sort of pumping the brakes on that? Do you do it with just the men? Do you announce it to the congregation so that there aren't questions about like what happened with those guys we were voting on? How do you go about that when you kind of hit a speed trap?
I think it's helpful to not be too public about a man's candidacy until you're certain that he is the guy. So I would really try to not talk to the congregation about a person's training until you're certain that you're putting them forward, to avoid that very situation. Yeah. But if you're in it,
Let's say the cat has left the bag.
Yeah. As they say, estamos aquí. Yeah, I think you want to do your best to walk the line between informing the congregation but protecting that man's dignity. Yeah. So you might say something along the lines of, we're going to pause this candidacy, or we're not necessarily putting this brother forward yet. We are really thankful about the things that we see in his life, but we just sense that the Lord would have further preparation for him. And not say, man, he's a knucklehead. What's wrong with this guy? He's volatile, or the chemistry's bad. Just be laudatory publicly in a way that helps his dignity.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on that. It's okay to tell the congregation, as we're preparing to serve you, we want to make sure that all the brothers are ready for this, and so we recognize we need to do some more training. Put it on you as the lead pastor to say, I realize I need to give this brother and this brother more time to get them ready for the demands of pastoral ministry. And so we're going to take the next 6 months, and we're going to work on that, and we'll revisit with the congregation later.
Yeah, I think, I just want to add that I think a lot of guys have been in that situation, and they were too afraid to hit the brakes, and they regretted it for years. So, yeah, even if it was a wreck, somewhat hit the brakes, it could be really painful to have someone called a pastor of the church, and they're not really suited or showing the fruit that they're called, gifted by the Spirit to do that.
Real quick say too. You can now also tell them, I went to I'm sorry, I'll use this one. I went to a conference, we learned a few more things, we're going to slow things down. Like the conference, the reading that helps, again, putting it on you, I think that's great, Phil, and just saying, we just learned some things that we want to work through and just extend that as well. Yeah, it's helpful. Another question over there.
Yeah, it might be piggybacking off something similar that was said, but Brad, you had mentioned a particular contingency within your church about an overcorrection to the right or whatever the case may be. How do you deal pastorally with overzealous men that typically in those groups, those are the men who typically desire pastoral ministry or teaching ministry in some capacity, and some genuinely so, right, to feed the flock and not for self-aggrandizement, although there are some of those guys that do fall into that. But how do you shepherd those guys well through that, or what would be your approach, or how are you thinking through that within your own context?
That's a great question, because you're right. There is a strength to young guys that care passionately about that is a good thing. What I've tried to do in a few cases is to tell them that to think about leadership in such dichotomies, such stark dichotomies, is unrealistic and unhelpful and unbiblical. Yes, we want to be men of conviction and strength and courage, but yet that doesn't mean that we're not also gentle and long-suffering and meek. And I think what happens when these guys are overcorrecting, there's a lot of emphasis on, the exaltation of Christ aspect and very little cultivating of the incarnation aspect of Christ's ministry. So a sermon that has been helpful for me, that I've tried to share with these brothers, is a sermon by Jonathan Edwards called The Diverse Excellencies of Jesus Christ. It's a famous sermon. You can Google it, The Diverse Excellencies of Jesus Christ, where Edwards looks at Christ in Revelation as the lion and the lamb, that beautiful verse, and he talks about how he's basically exalting Christ, and one of the proofs biblically of Christ's deity is how he is such a diverse excellent, and he says he's the strongest person in the universe, but also the most humble. He's the most courageous, but also most gentle. So these things that are on the opposite spectrum. So I want to take these guys that are really drawn to being tough guys for Jesus and have them read that sermon and say, a tough guy also needs to be the most tender. And so that's one approach that I've taken, is to say that, brother, there's a strength, but also there's a humility that needs to be brought out.
Yeah, we're all affected by our personalities, and some of us are just bombastic, and maybe good-hearted, but bombastic. Everything is thunder and lightning and fire and hammer and all that. And I think this is, I love that. That's such a good illustration. That's where we've got to go back and see, here Paul is toward the end of his life, writing to Timothy, and he tells him the thing that he's emphasizing for him is not, you've got to hammer these people in Ephesus. He said, you've got to do what you're doing with gentleness. And you got to remind those guys. Sometimes you got to get in their face and say, brother, you got incredible strength, and I love it. I love your passion, but you're like a bull in a china shop. you are wrecking people. And I want to show you what the Word says on this. And you go to the Word. I want you to read Jonathan Edwards. I want you to see, I want you to read historically guys like Brainerd, McChain, Martin Lloyd-Jones, Bucer. I mean, these were mighty, mighty men with lots of force and power, but there was that gentleness and kindness. And then ultimately, look at Christ. Look at the Lion and the Lamb. Yeah.
I think that there's examples in the scripture of Moses and Nehemiah there for a reason. Moses lost his cool. Nehemiah, he's pulling hair. He couldn't get me, but he was pulling hair. Yeah, he'd get my beard, I guess. But I think there's some of us come have in our background, so there's some fundamentalist preaching out there where they just beat the sheep, and just have those conversations with them. Show them sermons. Show them even video of themselves if you have to. Help them see that we're shepherds, not cowboys. Cowboys drive the cattle, right? We don't drive. We get out front and lead. And there's 1 Peter 5 says to shepherd, not to lord your authority. And sometimes that the pulpit becomes the bully pulpit, and that's also our job, to guard the church from that kind of abuse. Usually the guys that are hitting really hard and beating, my experience is that there's something else going on. And it's a sign to be concerned about when someone's beating the sheep. They probably have something that's about to come out.
Well, guys, that's our time on our panel discussion, so we're going to transition to a break. But before we do that, Phil, if you would just real quick give us a word about the Pillar Network. Not everyone here either is familiar with it or is a part of Pillar Network.
Yeah.
And so if you just give us a word on what that is and your role in it, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I am Director of Pastoral Care and Mentoring for the Pillar Network. So I get to pastor pastors. So Jim, you and I are doing very similar things on that. And you can see the DNA. This is so important with us. What does it mean to be a Pillar Church? So if you go to thepillarnetwork.com, you look on the website, and you start looking at churches, these churches are the same. We're committed to gospel proclamation, to biblical authority, to live exposition. So we're not piping in sermons. We're preaching pastorally to the congregation. We are elder-led congregations, and so we have congregational government with elder leadership. We are confessionally and cheerfully Baptist. Nate Aiken, who's our executive director, has a book that came out earlier this year, and the title of it is Confessional, Convictional, Cheerful Baptists, because that's what we are. And then we're kingdom-minded. The Pillar Network started about 15 years ago. It was called by another name. It was something like the... okay, there we go. Thank you. North American Church Planting Foundation. Well, how do you get that out of your mouth and all that? Well, the whole focus was there was a group of guys that had been mentored, and they wanted more help. They'd planted churches. They needed more help, needed more encouragement, and so the Pillar Network started out of that with the goal that we want to be an association of churches globally that is planting and that is doing revitalization work and that is equipping local churches. And so about a fourth of our churches, probably over a fourth, are outside the U.S. Inside the U.S., we're SBC churches. Outside, we're Baptistic churches. So I have been with Pillar guys in a number of countries over the last 2.5 years, and it's been a joy to see what the Lord's doing. I've had conversations. I was on a Zoom call week before last with about 7 or 8 pastors in India that are part of the Pillar Network. just talking about pastoral ministry, same kind of stuff that we've been doing. And the fellowship of these churches, we're not interested in having a bunch of rock stars that everybody's just wowed over. I call it, where I grew up, is cornbread and peas kind of guy. It is normal pastors committed to the flock, men that are serious about walking with God, and that love the partnership that we have together. And so, if you're interested, there's information on the website, and Billy and I, Brad, Garrett, we're all glad to talk with you about becoming part of it. But we have a membership process. You fill out an application online, you send that in, then there's an interview. We want to know about, do you really preach expositionally? We want to know, do you have a good reputation with other like-minded pastors? There have been a few times that guys have been removed that managed to get in that were not representative of this DNA. And we're serious about it. And so if someone is not preaching the word faithfully, we want to pray for them and encourage them, but we do not want them to be members of the Pillar Network until that matter is resolved. So,
Yeah, thank you very much. And again, Pastor Phil's book that he gave us, donated to us for this conference. Nate's book you're talking about. Nate sent us some of those as well, so
Okay,
a lot of
good,
them should have
good.
gotten that book as well. And so, all right, guys, take about a 25-minute break, and then we will get back after it.